They laughed at her tattoo. But when a SEAL commander walked in, his salute silenced them all. Before we begin this powerful story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss stories like this one. Now, let's go back to the beginning, to a quiet town where whispers carried farther than truth. The little town of Rockford sat quietly in the rolling hills of North Carolina. It was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where people waved when you drove past, and where gossip traveled faster than the wind through the trees. The coffee shop on Main Street was always buzzing with chatter, and on Saturdays the farmers' market drew crowds of families, churchgoers, and curious tourists passing through. But for Claire Donovan, Rockford was not always a friendly place. Claire was 32, tall, with auburn hair tied back most of the time, and a face that carried both beauty and weariness. She lived in a small rental house at the edge of town, worked part-time at the library, and spent her weekends volunteering at the community center. People noticed her kindness, but they also noticed something else: the tattoo on her right forearm, running from her wrist toward her elbow, was a bold design, an anchor intertwined with wings, a folded flag beneath and above it, a line of words written in simple script, for those who never came home. The tattoo wasn't just art. It wasn't something she picked off a wall at a tattoo shop. It was a memory carved into her skin, a story she carried every day. But in Rockford, not everyone understood Dot at the diner. Folks sometimes whispered. At church, one or two older members shook their heads. Even at the library, Claire heard little comments as she shelved books. Such a shame. A young woman marking herself like that. Trying to look tough, I suppose. Doesn't she? No, that's not ladylike. The words stung, though Claire never let it show. She had learned to carry herself with quiet dignity, smiling at people who frowned, helping those who muttered about her, and saying nothing when laughter followed her down the grocery aisle. But beneath her calm surface, Claire carried memories darker than most of her neighbors could imagine. Her husband, James Donovan, had been a Navy SEAL, strong, steady, a man of few words but deep love. They'd met when Claire was waitressing in Virginia Beach, and within a year they were married. James deployed not long after, and though life apart was hard, Claire believed in him, trusted him, and prayed every night for his safety. But prayers don't always change the outcome. 3 years earlier, James never came back. His team had been sent on a mission overseas. The details were vague, locked behind military reports and red tape. But what Claire knew was this: his unit had been ambushed, and James had been killed protecting the lives of others. When the officers came to her door, she didn't cry at first. She just stood there, gripping the doorknob until her knuckles turned white, listening as the words fell like stones in her chest. Later, she wept alone. And even later still, when friends and neighbors offered casseroles, prayers, and pity, she decided she would carry his memory differently. That's when she got the tattoo. Every line of ink told a piece of the story. The anchor for James's Navy service, the wings for the fallen brothers in arms, the folded flag for the homecoming that never came, and the words that echoed in her heart every day, for those who never came home. It wasn't decoration. It was devotion, Dot. But in Rockford, few people knew the meaning, and those who didn't know judged her quickly. On a bright Saturday morning, Claire walked into the coffee shop for her usual order, black coffee, no sugar, and felt eyes on her arm. At the counter, 2 young men in baseball caps chuckled. "Hey, look at that," one whispered loud enough for half the room to hear. "Think she's trying to be some kind of soldier?" The other laughed. "Bet she's never seen a day of real service in her life. Just trying to look tough." The barista froze awkwardly, not knowing whether to defend Claire or stay out of it. A couple of older women turned their heads and smirked. Someone muttered, "Disgraceful." Claire's hand tightened on the counter. She could have snapped back, could have shamed them for their ignorance. But she didn't. She took her coffee, lifted her chin, and walked out with quiet dignity. Still, as she stepped into the sunlight, her heart felt heavy. She remembered James's smile. She remembered the folded flag handed to her at his funeral, the officer's words, "On behalf of a grateful nation." She remembered the silence of her home that night when everyone else had gone. And now, years later, strangers laughed at the very mark she carried for him. Yet Claire wasn't weak. She wasn't fragile. She had chosen to stay in Rockford for a reason. She believed she could help others here, maybe honor James by giving back to a town that needed compassion, even if it didn't always give compassion to her. That afternoon, at the community center, she worked with a group of kids, teaching them reading skills. One little boy asked about her tattoo. "Miss Claire, what's that mean?" She smiled softly and knelt to his level. "It's a reminder," she said. "Some people give everything to protect others. We should never forget them." The boy nodded, wide-eyed. Unlike the adults, he didn't judge. He simply accepted. And that gave Claire a little strength. But Claire's story was only beginning. What she didn't know was that someone else had just moved into town. A man whose path would soon cross hers in a way that would change everything. His name was Commander Daniel Reeves, a decorated Navy SEAL officer nearing retirement, sent temporarily to Rockford for a training program with the local National Guard unit. He was respected, stern but fair, with the kind of presence that drew silence when he walked into a room. In one ordinary day, in that same coffee shop where laughter had stung Claire so deeply, Commander Reeves would notice her tattoo. The room would grow still, the whispers would stop, and the salute he gave her would silence every mocking voice in Rockford. The next morning, Rockford woke to a gray sky and the smell of rain in the air. Claire pulled on her old jean jacket, the one with worn elbows, and walked into town for groceries. She liked mornings best, the streets quiet, the shopkeepers. Setting up, the calm before the small-town chatter began. But even in the calm, she felt the stares. A glance here, a whisper there. The tattoo on her arm drew more attention than her face ever did. She had learned to live with it, though it never got easier. At the grocery store, Mrs. Franklin from church stopped her. "Claire," she said, tilting her head toward the tattoo, "don't you think it's time you covered that up? Some folks say it's unsettling for the children." Claire gave a polite smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Franklin. I'll keep that in mind." She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply moved on, placing apples and bread into her basket, while Mrs. Franklin shook her head behind her. What Claire didn't know was that, across town at the National Guard base, Commander Daniel Reeves had just arrived. Daniel was in his late 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face lined by years of service. He had led men through some of the most dangerous missions overseas, had medals tucked away in drawers he never spoke about, and carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen both the worst and the best of humanity. His assignment in Rockford was temporary, a training exercise with the Guard, a chance to evaluate leadership, discipline, and readiness. For him, it was routine, but for Rockford, it was unusual. Soldiers weren't new to the area, but a SEAL commander of his rank? That turned heads. On his first weekend in town, Daniel decided to blend in. No uniform, no display of rank. Just jeans, a dark jacket, and a cup of black coffee at the cafe on Main Street. It was there, at the same coffee shop where Claire had been mocked days earlier. That fate brought them together. Claire pushed through the door, shaking off the drizzle from her jacket. The bell chimed above her, and a few heads turned. At the counter, the same two young men in baseball caps sat with their mugs. grinning the moment they saw her. "Well, look who's back," one said under his breath. "Wonder if she got that tattoo at a discount," the other snickered. A couple of people laughed softly. The barista, nervous again, fumbled with cups. Claire kept her head high, though her cheeks flushed. She stepped up to the counter, ordered her coffee, and reached for her wallet. As she did, her sleeve slid up, revealing the full design of the tattoo dot. That was the moment Commander Reeves looked up from his corner table. His eyes locked on the tattoo. The anchor, the wings, the folded flag, the words. His face, usually hard as stone, softened. He set his coffee down, rose from his chair, and crossed the room. The chatter died instantly. People noticed him. Even in plain clothes, his posture, his bearing, it spoke of command. The young men stopped smirking, sensing something had shifted. Daniel. Reeves came to a stop beside Claire. He looked at her tattoo again, then at her face. Without a word, he straightened, brought his hand to his forehead, and gave her a crisp, respectful salute. The room fell silent. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the drip of coffee behind the counter, the shuffle of someone's shoe against the floor. Claire froze. A rush of emotion hit her. Surprise, confusion, and something she hadn't felt in years. Recognition. Slowly, she returned the commander's gaze. You knew someone, she said quietly. Daniel lowered his hand, his voice steady. Yes, and I know what that tattoo means. You honor the fallen. A lump rose in Claire's throat. No one in town had ever said it like that. Most mocked, some dismissed. But here was a man who understood, not just with words, but with a gesture that carried the weight of countless missions, countless brothers lost. The silence stretched. The young men shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat, muttering, We didn't mean nothing by it, but it was too late. The room had already changed. Respect hung in the air now, not laughter. The barista slid Claire's coffee across the counter, her hands trembling slightly. It's on the house, she whispered. Claire took the cup, nodding softly. She wanted to speak, to explain, but words didn't come. She simply looked at Daniel, gratitude shining in her eyes. May I join you? He asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded. Together, they sat at his table by the window, the rest of the coffee shop buzzing with whispers, but no laughter this time. For the first time in years, Claire felt like she wasn't alone. The rain had stopped by the time they walked outside. The street glistened, and the sky began to break open with streaks of sunlight. Your husband? Daniel asked softly, as they strolled toward the park. Yes, Claire said, her voice steady but low. James Donovan. SEAL Team 4. He didn't come back. Daniel's jaw tightened. He nodded slowly. I knew of him. Good man. Brave. Claire's eyes widened. You knew James? Not personally, Daniel said, but I knew his reputation. Word spreads in the teams. He was respected. Her throat ached with both pride and grief. No one in Rockford had ever spoken James's name with that kind of reverence. Most people here don't understand, she admitted. They think the tattoo is decoration. Daniel stopped walking, turned to her. Then let me tell you something. That tattoo? That's not decoration. That's remembrance. That's sacrifice. And anyone who laughs at it doesn't deserve to know the meaning. Tears stung her eyes, but she held them back. She had grown strong since James's death. Still, hearing those words from a commander, a man who had stood in the same darkness James once stood in, broke something open in her heart. Thank you, she whispered. He gave a small nod, his gaze steady. You don't need to thank me. You've already given more than most people will ever understand. But the story didn't end there. Word of the salute spread through town faster than wildfire. By evening, half of Rockford was talking about it. Did you hear? That Navy. Officer saluted Claire Donovan in the cafe. Maybe that tattoo isn't just for show after all. Wonder what it means. Some folks soft, embarrassed by their earlier mockery. Others grew defensive, insisting, well, she still could have been more modest about it. But tide was shifting. For the first time, Claire wasn't just the woman with the tattoo. She was the widow of a SEAL, carrying his memory with courage. And Commander Reeves? He wasn't finished with Rockford yet. The training exercise he was leading at the guard base was about to pull Claire into a storm she didn't see coming. A storm of truth, injustice, and secrets buried deep. And in that storm, her strength. The strength no one in Rockford believed she had would be tested more than ever before. The Monday after the cafe incident, Rockford felt different at the post office. People who once looked away now gave Claire small nods of respect. At the grocery store, the young men who had mocked her muttered quick apologies and avoided her eyes. Even Mrs. Franklin from church, who had suggested covering the tattoo, patted Claire's hand and said, I didn't realize, dear. You must be so proud of your husband. Claire didn't bask in it. Respect wasn't what she wanted. Truth was. But she couldn't deny that for the first time since James's funeral, people weren't laughing at his memory. Commander Daniel Reeves had done that with a single salute. Still, Claire's heart was unsettled. She couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel's arrival in Rockford wasn't just coincidence. She had seen the way he looked at her tattoo, the way his expression carried both recognition and sorrow. That evening, she baked a casserole. A habit she had picked up when James was alive, comfort food for hard days, and decided to bring it to Daniel as a thank you. She knew he was staying in the small guest quarters near the guard base, just outside town. When he opened the door, dressed in a plain gray t-shirt, she felt suddenly nervous. He looked every bit the commander, even out of uniform. Disciplined. Posture, sharp eyes, and a presence that filled the small doorway. I thought you might like this, she said, holding out the casserole. A small smile tugged at his lips. Ma'am, that may be the kindest thing anyone's given me in a long time. He stepped aside. Please, come in. The room was modest. A desk, a neatly made bed, a duffel bag tucked in the corner. But on the desk, Claire noticed framed photos. A group of men in fatigues, a dusty village in the background, and a folded flag under glass. You lost someone too, she said softly. Daniel followed her gaze. His jaw tightened. More than one. Too many. She nodded, setting the casserole on the desk. For a moment, they stood in silence. Two lives bound by sacrifice, neither had chosen. Finally, Claire asked the question that had been pressing on. Her heart. When you saw my tattoo, what did it mean to you? Daniel sat down, gesturing for her to do the same. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. It meant you're carrying something most people don't understand. The weight of a life given. The weight of promises broken by fate. And it meant you're stronger than you look, because you carry it out in the open. Her eyes stung with tears. She forced a smile. You make it sound noble, but most days I just feel tired. Strength and tiredness aren't opposites. Daniel said, they're brothers. You can be both. His words sank deep, filling places in her heart that had been hollow for years. The next week, Daniel invited her to the guard base to watch a training exercise. Claire hesitated, worried about stirring gossip, but something inside told her to go. When she arrived, the sight of soldiers running drills, shouting commands, and moving with precision struck her like a wave of memory. James had once been part of this world. She had lived in the rhythm of deployments, brief phone calls, and letters written under the weight of danger. Now, standing on the sidelines, she felt both pride and grief all over again. Daniel joined her, explaining the drills, pointing out the discipline and teamwork. But as they watched, a voice rose from nearby. It was Captain Harris, a mid-level officer in charge of the Rockford Guard unit. He was in his late 30s, stocky, with sharp features and a chip on his shoulder. "Commander Reeves," Harris said with a forced smile. "I didn't realize you'd brought company." His eyes flicked to Claire's tattoo. "Ah, the famous widow." Claire stiffened. The way he said it wasn't kind. It was mocking, disguised as polite. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Captain Harris, this is Mrs. Claire Donovan." Her husband was James Donovan, SEAL Team 4. Harris smirked. "I've heard the name. Shame what happened. But I suppose she's found ways to keep his memory alive." His gaze lingered on the tattoo. Claire's stomach twisted. She wanted to leave, but Daniel stepped forward, his voice firm. "Captain, respect is not optional in my presence. I suggest you remember that." The tension between the two men was sharp as steel. Harris gave a quick, insincere nod and walked off, barking orders at his men. Claire exhaled slowly. "Why do I feel like he doesn't like you?" Daniel gave a humorless chuckle. "Because he doesn't. Men like Harris see authority as something to protect, not something to honor. My being here makes him feel small." Claire frowned. "And me being here?" Daniel looked at her. "You remind him of sacrifice. People like him don't like being reminded." That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Captain Harris, his smirk, the way he spoke James's name like it meant nothing. Something wasn't right about him. She could feel it. 2 days later, her feeling proved true. While shelving books at the library, Claire overheard 2 guardsmen whispering in the corner. "Harris is pushing the budget again. Covering something, I swear. If Reeves finds out..." Their voices lowered when they saw her nearby, but the words stuck. Covering something. If Reeves finds out, Claire's heart pounded. She didn't know much about military budgets or guard operations, but she knew corruption when she heard it. And if Captain Harris was hiding something, Daniel was the man who would uncover it. But at what cost? Claire remembered the look in Harris's eyes, sharp and cold. If Daniel pushed too hard, Harris wouldn't just fight back with words. Men like him didn't play fair. And now, because of her connection to Daniel, Claire knew she would be caught. In the middle, 1 week after the cafe salute, Rockford no longer whispered about Claire's tattoo. They whispered about something else entirely. The sudden tension at the guard base, the unusual presence of a SEAL commander, and the widow who seemed to be caught up in it. All. Claire felt the weight of eyes again. But this time, it wasn't just judgment. It was curiosity, suspicion. And deep down, she knew one thing. The mockery of her tattoo had only been the beginning. Something bigger, darker, was about to break open in Rockford. And when it did, her strength would be tested far, beyond silent stares and whispered insults. The following days in Rockford felt unsettled, like the air before a storm. Claire could sense it everywhere, in the way the guardsmen walked a little stiffer in town, in the way folks whispered about something brewing at the base, and in the way Daniel Reeves's eyes seemed to scan every room he entered, sharp and searching. Claire tried to go about her life as usual. She taught her reading group at the community center, stocked shelves at the library, baked bread when the Yastued. Nights felt too long, but the tension lingered, and she knew it was tied to Captain Harris. One evening, as she was closing the library, she noticed a black SUV idling across the street. Its headlights were off, but she felt the weight of someone watching. When she stepped outside and locked the door, the SUV pulled away, slow and deliberate. Her stomach nodded. She went straight to Daniel's quarters at the guard base. He opened the door, seeing the worry in her face before she even spoke. "Claire?" "There was a car watching me," she said, her voice unsteady. "It followed me from the community center yesterday, too. I thought I was imagining it, but tonight I'm sure." Daniel's jaw tightened. He ushered her inside, closing the door firmly. "That's not nothing. You don't ignore things like that." She swallowed hard. "Do you think it's connected to Harris?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He pulled out a small notepad from his desk, jotted something down, then finally looked up. "Yes, and if I'm right, it means he's worried. People who watch you are people who feel threatened." Claire's hands trembled slightly. "Threatened by me? I'm just a librarian." Daniel's gaze softened. "No, threatened by the truth. And you happened to hear something you weren't supposed to." The next morning, Daniel called a private meeting with 2 senior officers from the guard. Claire wasn't allowed inside, but she waited outside the conference room, the voices muffled but tense. When the door opened, Daniel stepped out, his face grim. "They've been cooking the books," he told her quietly as they walked outside. "Harris has been inflating supply orders, pocketing the difference. Fuel, equipment, even rations. On paper, it looks legitimate. In reality, it's theft." Claire's heart sank. She had suspected something wrong, but hearing it confirmed was different. And the men under him? Do they know? Some suspect. Most stay quiet. Harris rules with fear. If anyone speaks up, he buries them in paperwork, or worse, transfers them out. And now that I'm here, he knows I'll expose it. Claire looked at him. "And he'll come after you." Daniel gave a small, dry smile. "He already has." That evening, Claire walked home from the store with a bag of groceries when she heard footsteps behind her. Quick, heavy dot she turned. 2 men in plain clothes, unfamiliar, closing the distance. Her pulse spiked. She quickened her pace, gripping her bag tighter. The men exchanged a glance, and one called out, "Hey, lady, you shouldn't be walking." Alone at night, Claire's chest tightened. She ducked into the nearest alley, praying it would lead her back to Main Street, but the men followed. Their voices low and taunting got, she rounded a corner and nearly collided with Daniel. He had been walking from the base, his instincts sharp. The moment he saw her fear and the men closing in, his training took over. "Back off," Daniel barked, stepping between them and Claire. The men froze, but only for a second. One sneered. "This isn't your business, old man." Daniel's stance shifted, steady and unflinching. His voice dropped to a dangerous calm. "It is now." The alley seemed to shrink around them. Claire's heart pounded as the men hesitated, then slowly backed away, muttering curses under their breath. Within seconds, they were gone. Daniel turned to her. "You all right?" Her legs shook, but she nodded. "I think so." He walked her home, his eyes scanning every shadow. At her porch, she whispered, "They were watching me, just like before." "Harris sent them, didn't he?" Daniel didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, if he didn't send them, he allowed it. And that's enough. News of the alley incident spread quietly through Rockford. Folks didn't know details, but they sensed danger in the air. The cafe chatter turned from tattoos and gossip to hushed questions. What's happening at the base? Why is the commander always with Claire Donovan? Something's not right. Claire felt the shift. Some looked at her with sympathy now, others with suspicion. Either way, she was no longer invisible. The pressure weighed heavy. She found herself staring at James's folded flag late at night, asking him silently, "What would you do? Would you fight? Or would you walk away?" But deep down, she knew the answer. James had never walked away from truth. And she couldn't either. Week later, Daniel asked her to meet him at the base again. He had uncovered more invoices, receipts, false signatures. Enough to bring Harris down, but there was a problem. Harris knows I'm building a case, Daniel said, spreading the papers across the desk. And now, because they followed you, he thinks you're part of it too. He'll try to discredit you. Maybe worse. Claire felt a chill. What do we do? Daniel looked at her, his eyes steady. We stand firm. But you need to know something. Claire, this isn't just about money anymore. Harris is tied to something bigger. Weapons shipments gone missing, supplies unaccounted for. This isn't just theft. It's criminal. Her breath caught. Weapons? Yes, Daniel said grimly. And if we don't stop it, someone innocent is going to pay the price. That night, Claire dreamed of James. In the dream, he stood at the edge of a foggy field, his uniform dusty, his face calm. He didn't speak, but he nodded once, the same steady nod he used to give before leaving for deployment. When she woke, tears wet her pillow. She understood. He was telling her to be strong. The next day, she pulled on her jacket, rolled up her sleeve so the tattoo was visible, and walked straight into town with her head held high. If Captain Harris wanted to intimidate her, he would. See the truth instead. She was no longer afraid. But what Claire didn't yet realize was that Harris wasn't finished. He was about to strike harder, dirtier, and in a way that would not only endanger her reputation, but her very life. The air in Rockford grew heavier with each passing day. The whispers at the cafe turned into pointed stares at the grocery store. The two men in baseball caps no longer smirked when they saw Claire. Instead, they looked away, guilty. But others weren't so quick to soften. Rumors began to spread. She's stirring up trouble with the guard. They say she's meddling in things she doesn't understand. Maybe she's just bitter and looking for attention. Claire heard every word. She felt every look. Yet she walked with her sleeve rolled up, the tattoo visible, daring the world to see it. She told herself that every insult was nothing compared to the folded flag on her shelf at home. But then Harris struck. It happened at the next town council meeting. The small chamber was packed, as it usually was when guard matters were discussed. People leaned in their chairs, a smell of coffee thick in the air, while the mayor shuffled papers at the front. Claire hadn't planned to attend, but Daniel urged her to. If he tries anything, it's better you see it yourself, he told her. When Captain Harris stood to speak, his voice carried smooth confidence. He presented numbers, talked about improvements at the base, and hinted at false rumors being spread. Then, as if casually, he glanced toward Claire. Unfortunately, he said, certain civilians have been interfering with guard operations. People with emotional wounds, using tragedy to insert themselves where they don't belong. I respect sacrifice, but I won't tolerate disruption. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to Claire. Her chest tightened. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but Harris wasn't finished. He pulled a paper from his folder and held it up. We even received a complaint about Mrs. Donovan, claiming she's been harassing soldiers, demanding access to restricted areas. For her own safety and the guard's integrity, I recommend we limit her presence on base. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Franklin shook her head sadly. The two young men who once mocked her stared at the floor. Claire's face burned hot. None of it was true, but the lies hung heavy in the air. Then Daniel stood. Enough, his voice boomed. The room froze. Commander Reeves stepped forward, his posture sharp, his eyes locked on Harris. These accusations are false, Daniel said. Claire Donovan has done nothing but honor her husband's sacrifice and support this town. If anyone's disrupting operations, it's Captain Harris, covering theft, intimidation, and corruption. The chamber erupted in whispers. They... Mayor banged his gavel for order, but no one listened. Harris's face darkened, his jaw clenched. You have no proof, Harris spat. Daniel's voice dropped low and steady. Oh, I have proof, and soon so will everyone else. The tension was so thick it was hard to breathe. Harris gathered his papers, forced a smile, and sat down. But his eyes never left Claire Dot. She knew that look. It wasn't over. It had just begun. That night, Claire returned home to find her front porch vandalized. Red spray paint across her door. Liar. Her hands shook as she scrubbed it away, tears slipping down her face. She had endured whispers, laughter, judgment. But this was different. This was hate aimed directly at her. Daniel arrived minutes later. He saw the paint, the rag in her trembling hand, and without a word, took it from her and finished the scrubbing himself. I'm sorry, he said quietly. You have nothing to be sorry for, she whispered. This is Harris. Daniel nodded grimly. He's desperate. That makes him dangerous. Claire sank onto the porch steps, exhausted. Sometimes I wonder if I should just leave. Go somewhere else. Start over. Daniel crouched beside her, his eyes steady. Claire, listen to me. Men like Harris count on good people giving up. If you walk away, he wins. And James's memory deserves better than that. Her throat tightened. She looked at her tattoo, traced the lines with her finger. James never walked away. No, Daniel said firmly. And neither will you. The next morning, Rockford buzzed with division. Half the town sided with Harris, convinced by his smooth lies. The other half, stirred by Daniel's defiance, began to question what really went on at the guard base. At the diner, one woman said, I believe Claire. Harris always seemed slippery. Another scoffed. Or maybe she just wants attention. Tattoos, meetings, stirring up drama. Poor James is probably rolling in his grave. The words stabbed deep. Claire overheard them as she passed, but she didn't slow down. She couldn't afford to. That afternoon, Daniel showed her the evidence. He had gathered falsified receipts, duplicate invoices, shipping records that didn't match. It was enough to expose Harris. But they needed one more thing, a witness, and Claire was the only one who had overheard the soldiers whispering in the library. If you speak up, Daniel said, it strengthens the case. But it also paints a target on you. Claire's heart pounded. She remembered the men in the alley, the spray paint on her door, the stares at the meeting. She remembered the folded flag on her shelf. I'll do it, she said, her voice steady. For James, for the ones who never came. Home. That evening, she stood at the community center, speaking quietly to her group of children, when the power suddenly went out. The room went dark, kids shrieking nervously. Claire calmed them, lighting her phone. But outside, through the window, she saw it, headlights. The same black SUV. Her stomach dropped. Daniel wasn't there this time. It was just her, the children, and the dark. She locked the doors quickly, her heart hammering. Whoever was out there, they were watching, waiting, and she knew, with a chill that ran through her bones, that Harris was finished playing games. The fight for truth was about to turn deadly. The black SUV sat outside the community center, headlights glowing faintly through the rain. Inside, Claire kept her voice calm for the children, even as her pulse thundered in her chest. Everything's all right, she whispered, gathering them close. Stay together, stay quiet. The children trusted her. They always had. And now, with their wide eyes watching her for strength, she felt James's presence steadying her, the same quiet courage he had carried into battle. Minutes stretched. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, the headlights blinked off. The SUV rolled away, tires crunching on gravel. When Daniel arrived moments later, drenched from the rain, he saw the fear in her eyes. She explained what happened. His jaw clenched like iron. "That's it," he said. "This ends now." The next day, Daniel requested an emergency meeting with the Guard Oversight Board, a panel of officers brought in from outside the region. Harris laughed when he heard. "You think you can bring me down with paperwork?" he sneered. Daniel didn't flinch. "I don't need paperwork. I have truth." Word spread fast. By afternoon, the town hall was packed. Not just soldiers, but townsfolk too. Farmers, shopkeepers, churchgoers, all drawn by the growing storm. Claire sat near the front, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her tattoo bare for all to see. She could feel the eyes on her, half doubtful, half waiting. When Harris entered, he carried himself like a man untouchable. His uniform pressed sharp, his smile smug. He glanced at Claire with cold satisfaction. Then the board called the meeting. To order. Daniel stood first. Calm, commanding, his voice carried the weight of every battlefield he had ever walked. He laid out the evidence: receipts, invoices, shipping logs. Each document painted the picture clearer. Harris had been siphoning resources, selling equipment off the books, and intimidating anyone who questioned him. The crowd murmured. But Harris only smirked. "Paperwork can be forged," he said smoothly. "I've given my life to this service. And now I'm being slandered by a grieving widow and an officer who doesn't even belong here." The words cut sharp. All heads turned to Claire. This was the moment Harris wanted, to crush her publicly, to make her small again. Claire felt her throat tighten. She wanted to shrink back. But then she remembered the spray paint on her door, the SUV in the night, the laughter. At her tattoo years ago, she remembered James's folded flag, and she stood. Her voice shook at first, but grew stronger with each word. "I didn't ask to be part of this. I didn't ask to be mocked in grocery stores or laughed at in coffee shops. But I carry this tattoo because it means something. My husband, James Donovan, gave his life as a SEAL. He never came home. This," she lifted her arm, her voice breaking but strong, "isn't decoration. It's a promise, a reminder." And when I overheard guardsmen whispering about Harris's lies, I couldn't stay silent. The room was still. Claire's eyes burned, but she didn't look away. She looked directly at Harris. "You tried to scare me. You tried to silence me. But you can't, because I've already lost more than you could ever take." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few older men wiped their eyes. Even Mrs. Franklin bowed her head. And then Daniel rose beside her. "For what it's worth," said firmly, "I served with men like James Donovan. And if he were here today, I believe he'd salute his wife for her courage. Just as I will." He turned, facing Claire, and once more gave that sharp, unwavering salute. This time, the entire room followed. Soldiers rose one by one, hands at their brows. Even civilians, unsure how to salute, placed hands over their hearts. The air was thick with respect, heavy, humbling, undeniable. Harris's smirk vanished. He stood alone in a sea of reverence he could never command. The board reviewed the evidence. Within hours, Harris was stripped of his command, placed under arrest for fraud, intimidation, and abuse of authority. The black SUV was impounded. The men who had followed Claire vanished into custody. Rockford changed that day. Dot no longer did. People whisper about Claire's tattoo as a mark of shame. Now, when she walked down Main Street, folks nodded with quiet respect. Children pointed to her arm, and parents said, "That's for heroes." At the library, her students listened closer than ever when she read stories. At church, Mrs. Franklin clasped her hand and whispered, "I was wrong, dear. Forgive me." And at the cafe, where it had all begun, the young men in baseball caps stood when she walked in, pulling out a chair for her at their table. Claire never sought the attention. She only wanted truth. But in standing firm, she found something greater: justice, dignity, and the respect James's memory deserved. One evening, weeks later, she and Daniel walked along the quiet edge of town. The sun was low, the sky painted gold. "You fought harder than some soldiers I've known," Daniel said softly. Claire smiled faintly. "I just didn't want to forget him." "You didn't," Daniel said. "You honored him, and now everyone knows it." They stood in silence, the air warm. Around them, Claire traced her tattoo gently. The ink now more than just lines. It was victory for those who never came home. She whispered Dot, and this time it wasn't a lonely reminder. It was a promise carried by an entire town. From that day forward, no one in Rockford ever mocked Claire's tattoo again. They had seen what it stood for. They had seen her strength, and they would never forget the moment a SEAL commander saluted her, and the whole town followed.